On the 9th of Frostfall, there had been 44 independent kingdoms, counties, baronies, and dukedoms surrounding the Iliac Bay. On the 11th of Frostfall, there were but 4: Daggerfall, Sentinel, Wayrest, and Orsinium. How did this colossal shift of territorial control occur in such a short time span? No one answer exists, for several accounts of the events of these 2 days directly conflict with one another. This phenomenon is known as the Miracle of Peace, the Second Numidium Effect, and most commonly as the Warp in the West. The explanation for this anomalous event lies behind the Numidium, a colossal automaton structure created by the Dwemer before their disappearance. Prior to the Warp in the West, the sole recorded usage of the Numidium was by Tiber Septim in the closing years of the Second Era to aid in his conquest of Tamriel. Vivek, member of the Tribunal and one of the leaders of Morrowind at the time, had engaged in diplomacy talks with Tiber Septim, and both agreed to an armistice. The conditions for this was that Vivek offered Septim the Numidium in exchange for several concessions in Morrowind, such as preservation of self-rule, house traditions, and religious practices. Without the Numidium's original power source, the Heart of Lorkhan, it required 2 artifacts to function, both of which were created by Tiber Septim's Imperial Battle Mage, Zurin Arctus. The first was the Totem of Tiber Septim, which granted the bearer control over the Numidium, and could only be safely wielded if the individual using it belonged to the Septim lineage or bore a special supernatural affinity. The second was a large gem called the Mantella, which contained a powerful life force and was used to power the Numidium. It should be noted that the life force contained within the Mantella has been a matter of dispute. While the most common belief is that Zurin Arctus used his own life force to power the gem, other sources state that the life force may have possibly belonged to High King Ysmir Wolfhearth, the necromancer Manamako, or even Tiber Septim himself. With both the totem and the Mantella under his control, Tiber Septim went on to conquer the Aldmeri Dominion in the Somerset Isles and complete his unification of Tamriel. Tiber Septim was not satisfied with unification, however, and continued to use the Numidium to crush neutral royal families of Tamriel who he believed he could not trust to be loyal. Zurin Arctus objected to this, and in an ensuing battle both he and the Numidium were destroyed, with the totem and the Mantella being lost amidst the chaos. The life force stored within the Mantella was unable to live or die, and became a being known as the Underking, a figure of legend who sought to be reunited with his life force, or heart, so he could be granted the death that he wished for. Hundreds of years would pass as the elite Imperial Order known as the Blades were tasked with finding and reassembling all the pieces of the Numidium. By the 401st year of the Third Era, the Numidium had been reconstructed, and it was only the totem of Tiber Septim and the Mantella that needed to be located. These two were then found by the Blades, the totem in the possession of Lord Woodbourne of Wayrest, and the Mantella in a hidden plane within Aetherius. 4 years later, an agent of the Blades was tasked with recovering both of these artifacts. At this time in the Iliac Bay, there was unrest between several different key figures, with many vying for control of the region. Each of these figures had knowledge of the Numidium's existence and wished to use it for their own reasons. King Idri and Queen Baranzaya of Wayrest, Queen Akarithi of Sentinel, and King Gothried of Daggerfall each wished to destroy each other to become the dominant power within the Iliac Bay. The Orcish warlord Gortwog Gro Nagorm had similar intentions, wishing to recreate the homeland of Orsinium. The current ruling Emperor Uriel VII, acting through his legate Lady Briziana, wished to quell these rebellious uprisings and restore order to the Iliac Bay, as well as the surrounding regions of High Rock and Hammerfell. Two figures wished not for the Numidium itself, but rather the Mantella, the first of these being the necromancer Manamako, as he had his own intentions of harnessing its power to transform himself into a god. The last of these figures was the Underking, who wished to reclaim his life force stored within the Mantella and finally be granted a peaceful death. The agent of the Blades chose one of these figures and entrusted them with the totem, and shortly thereafter retrieved the Mantella for them as well. With both artifacts in hand, whomever it was that bore the totem then activated the Numidium. With the Numidium activated, what occurred next is unclear. Using the words of a report from a Blades archivist, they concluded that there is no plausible historical account of these events, and despairs that a plausible historical account shall ever be produced. Several members of the Blades gave reports that commonly contained descriptions of sudden natural disasters, battles breaking out across the land, as well as unexplainable distortions of time. Hammerfell agent Briarbird experienced a sandstorm in the early morning on the 9th of Frostfall that appeared out of seemingly nowhere, and when they reached the city of Bergama at nightfall, it was filled with the soldiers of Sentinel. In such a brief time span, Queen Akarithi of Sentinel now controlled all of northern Hammerfell. Even stranger was that Briarbird's trek had seemingly taken 2 days, not 1, as the reported date was now the 11th. Others reported a similar loss of time, the only people unaffected by this being the Sentinel soldiers. High Rock agent Grey Lady reported of a great inferno that burnt rapidly through the forests of Ykarlon and Phrygias. Grey Lady lost their sight as a direct result of this blaze, and after taking refuge in a temple in the wilderness to have their wounds healed, they learnt of a three-way clash between Daggerfall, Wayrest and Orsinium. The land between their kingdoms had been decimated. Ambassador Lord Nygon Strael was sailing west due to meet with Lady Briziena when a colossal tsunami destroyed the barge they were on, leaving only a few survivors. As Strael began to march to Wayrest, they saw villages along the Bielse on fire, and battles breaking out between Orsinium and Wayrest in the previously independent region of Gavaldon. After reaching Wayrest a week later and being granted an audience with King Idri and Queen Baranziah, Strael learned that the 44 regions surrounding the Iliac Bay had now become 4, with the armies of each continuing to do battle. Strael asked the King and Queen for the truth as to how this all occurred. Idri's usual jovial tone was absent, as he said that he did not want to disclose military secrets. Queen Baranziah maintained her calm manner and merely stated, "We do not know." As the morning of the 9th had somehow merged into the morning of the 11th, Idri elaborated by stating that they had no time to understand what had happened, only reacting by sending their armies to defend their lands against enemies who had gained great territorial advantage. Months later, Strael revisited the no man's land in between these 4 remaining kingdoms that continued in battle, and having seen the desolate, blackened nature of it, stated simply, "No mortal army caused that devastation." Following the activation of the Numidium and the subsequent warp in the west, the Iliac Bay became much more stable than it had previously been. Strael's reports 20 years later stated that the territories are no longer disputed, and the 4 kingdoms of Daggerfall, Wayrest, Sentinel, and Orsinium hold their new borders in peace. Several of the key figures previously mentioned have not been seen since the warp. Followers of Manamako believe that he was successful in his ascension to godhood, his new form being the Necromancer's Moon, also known as the Revenant. The Underking also has not been seen since, with rumours that he indeed reclaimed his heart and was granted the peaceful death that he had been seeking. Gone as well is the Blades agent who had possession of the totem of Mantella, with the Blades having lost contact with them after activation of the Numidium. As for the Numidium itself, it has not been seen on Tamriel since. Nygon Strael's reports only have this to say: "I can say there is nothing left of it, this power, this weapon, in the bay. The warp that it created swallowed it up." The most apparent question at the heart of this mystery is, who was the one to activate the Numidium? How is it possible that seemingly every key figure in the events surrounding the Iliac Bay achieved their goals to one extent or another? Wouldn't the bearer of the totem be the one to assume complete power over the bay? From an external perspective, it almost seems as though every figure was successful in activating the Numidium for their own intentions, though this surely would be impossible. One source suggests that this is indeed the truth, claiming that the activation of the Numidium caused a dragon break, a complicated phenomenon that can be briefly described as the flow of time being disrupted and becoming non-linear. The Numidium was activated in Daggerfall, and Sentinel, and Wayrest, and all other locations of the key figures at the same time. This would explain how each of them achieved their intended plans involving the Numidium, and also falls in line with the Blade's reports of experiencing time distortions. As mysterious and unclear of an explanation as it is the only one that has been given to assign any amount of meaning or sense to what occurred in the Iliac Bay on that fated day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and leave a comment below what your thoughts are about the warp in the West and what you would like me to discuss in my next Elder Scrolls lore video. The warp is certainly a fascinating event that also shines a lot of light on the nature of the Numidium and what it is capable of. Sources point to it being responsible for not just this, but also a second dragon break. It would be interesting to do a video on either the Numidium itself or the concept of dragon breaks. However, due to the complicated and in-depth nature of both of these topics, I don't think it's something I'm going to cover anytime soon. Not yet, anyway. Prior to my research on this video, I was actually unaware that the warp in the West is the ending of the Daggerfall game. It's given me some interest in attempting a playthrough of it sometime, and it might open me up to discussing some older pieces of Elder Scrolls lore. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.